On this beautiful celebration of the birth and also the life of Paramhansa Yogananda. There was a disciple of Yoganandaji who he first read Autobiography of a Yogi after Master had already left the body. And this is just 2 years after Yogananda had left. And he was in Europe, he was a Swiss man. And there was an Indian Swami on a lecture tour of Europe. This was the great Swami Ramdas, who many of you may have known or heard of. And he was enthralled by this Swami. And in fact, he went into a state of ecstasy and bliss for about 5 days, this Swiss man. And he could not speak, he could not eat. And when he came back to himself, he went to Swami Ramdas and said, "I want to be your disciple." And Swami Ramdas, who was a great master and was all-knowing, looked into this soul, and he said to him, very honestly, he said, "I'm not your guru. Yogananda is your guru." And this man said, but Yogananda is dead. And Swami Ramdas, with much greater wisdom, said, "No, you are dead. Yogananda is alive." And he was saying a great truth, that when a great master, as we all know, over the years, we hear so many stories of people having visions of Yoganandaji, miracles, visitations, dreams. So he's very much alive. And so this day is partly a celebration of his birth, his life, and what he gives us, what he gave us, and what he continues to give. Now, Paramhansa Yogananda had a very unique mission. Swami Kriyanandaji said that he was an avatar. He was one who was already free before he was born. He asked Yoganandaji that one time, and out of humility, Yogananda would not answer it directly, but he did acknowledge that. But he came with a very unusual mission. He came in modern times, especially to bring God into every part of our lives. There's an article that I just wrote last week, and it's in the Times of India today. And it's called Revisiting Spiritual Envoy Yogananda's Teachings. And I'll share some of the things that are in this article, and you can read it and find it. It's not online, it's in the print version, but you can make a copy if you'd like to see it. This morning, so many people read it that just our center in Delhi received 150 phone calls by lunchtime from people who wanted to learn Kriya Yoga, just from reading that article, and we received phone calls here also. But Yoganandaji came at a time when it was time to bring God into every part of our lives and to teach every single person that it was possible to find God within themselves, in their lives, and again in every part of their lives. Yoganandaji once said, "The time for knowing God has come." And that's what he came. He taught, as I say in this article, something very unusual, which was that you didn't have to go into the mountains or the caves in order to meditate, to find God. My own journey, in a way, sort of mirrors what Yogananda brought. Finally, as I realized over time, because I wanted to be a hermit. I read about yoga, gurus, meditation, and I decided I was going to be a hermit. And I lived in the United States, and I went up into the mountains of California to get away from the world, because I felt the world was all delusion. The world was going to keep me from finding God. And I would get away from it all and go up into the mountains and be by myself in silence, seclusion, solitude. Very romantic notion, very beautiful notion. At least I thought so at the time. I still think so, but I learned differently as I got there, because I've discovered that no matter how far I got from civilization and from other people, this fellow Devarshi was always following me around, chattering in my brain, talking about this and that, and keeping me from being able to meditate. And I realized that no matter how far I got, I actually had to get away from my own restlessness, my own mind, my own desires and attachments. And soon after, I found Swami Kriyanandaji in Ananda village in California. And the year was 1977. And again, I had this, as I see now, delusion that the spiritual path, I would come to this beautiful ashram in the mountains, which it was. I would do some gardening, which I did. I would meditate a lot, which I did. I would sit at the feet of this great master teacher, the disciple of Yogananda, Swami Kriyanandaji, which I also did. And I thought that was going to be the rest of my life. It was just quiet, solitude, simple living. But very soon, I saw that Swami Kriyanandaji, who was a great disciple, was expressing Yogananda's teachings in all the many, many ways that Yoganandaji gave, which was to bring God into raising children and starting schools. There was already a school begun at Ananda Village when I was there. It was to bring God, spiritual principles into businesses, into business life, into business activity. And within a year and a half, not only did I not succeed at escaping into the mountains, within a year and a half, Swamiji actually sent me away from Ananda to help start another Ananda community on some land that someone wanted to donate to us. And so the lesson in all these years of what Paramhansa Yoganandaji really brought was that we must find God where we are. And in fact, we can find God where we are. This talk that we listened to about Kriya Yoga, he didn't say, go up into the Himalayas or go up into the caves or the mountains and get away from it all and practice Kriya Yoga. His disciples, and this article points it out, his disciples were great businessmen. His most advanced disciple was a very successful businessman. They were artists, they were musicians, they were simple people, they were gardeners, they were everything under the sun. And Yoganandaji didn't tell them to escape from the world. Many of them, some of them came to his ashram. But he went all over America on his lecture tours, giving these teachings of Kriya Yoga to where the people were, rather than saying, you all have to come to me in the mountains. And this really is why we are all here today, because Swami Kriyanandaji has sent those of us who have been with him all these years all over the world, traveling, sharing these teachings. So far from escaping the world, I have seen the world. We had a joke in our early monastery at Ananda, which was, the U.S. Army was recruiting people, and their motto was, join the army, see the world. And it was this romantic thing of going all over the world in wars, but still you would see the world. But we had the joke was, join the monastery and see the world, because Swamiji sent us all over the world. In the end, I've gone to Russia, to Europe, to South America, Mexico, Central America, India, Canada, all over the world, because this is what Yoganandaji gave to us. Swami Kriyanandaji said that Yogananda was a bliss avatar. He was an avatar of divine bliss. And Swami Kriyanandaji said that divine bliss naturally wants to expand, wants to give, wants to grow. And since Yoganandaji left the body, his vibration, his teachings, his bliss have continued to grow over the years. And this article points out a few of these very interesting ways, which is that, for example, many, many years after he left the body, the great founder of Apple Computer, Steve Jobs, he was a great lover of Yogananda, an autobiography of a yogi. It was the only book he had on his iPad, and he read it every year. The great, I don't know if it was great, but it was fascinating for many people. There was a very popular series of TV shows and movies in America called Star Trek. And there was a disciple of Yogananda was visiting the man who created that whole series and the characters and everything. And he saw Autobiography of a Yogi on this man's bookshelf in his office. And he said, you've read Autobiography of a Yogi? And this man said, where do you think I get all of my ideas? So there's a great power and inspiration, creativity in that book. It continues today. There's a good friend of mine at Ananda Village. His name is Cliff Kushler, and he had the desire to help handicapped people communicate with each other more easily. And that eventually grew into creating an app that helps people to communicate, and it's an app called Swipe, S-W-Y-P-E. And millions and hundreds of millions of people have this app on their phone. It was really the first texting app where you just start moving your finger around and it guesses the words and all that. And I asked him one time, how did you do this? I mean, because it was such a creative endeavor, because he essentially was the sole creator of it. He had people working under him. He said very simply, whenever I had a problem, and I think By problem, he meant either with programming or with the business side of it. He said he would meditate, he would do Kriya Yoga, he would pray to God as Divine Mother, and the answers would come to him. So you see that in this modern time, we're not meant to escape from the world. And where can you escape now? I mean, where can you find a place of solitude in India? It's very, very hard to find. I can testify to that. But also in the whole world. But the influences of the world are everywhere. We cannot avoid it. Paramhansa Yogananda said, and I quote it in this article, he said that his line of gurus, beginning with Mahavatar Babaji, that Mahavatar Babaji, as he put it, is well aware of the trend of modern times, especially of the influence and complexities of Western civilization, and he realizes the necessity of spreading the self-liberations of yoga equally in the West and in the East. And so it was to spread these teachings to where each and every one of us is right now. We don't have to go anywhere. As Yogananda Ji said, the time for knowing God has come. And we also, and this is maybe one of the most important things that he brought, which is that we do not need to separate our so-called worldly life and our spiritual life. Because he said that we can bring God into everything, we can bring spirituality into everything. I'm just going to mention a few of these things because there are so many that I can't even remember all of them. In a way, Swami Kriyanandaji, his great disciple, was the one who was, I think, entrusted and empowered by Yogananda to bring these things into every aspect of life. And you see it in Swami Kriyanandaji's books, which bring God into every aspect of human existence. And I'll just mention some of these books. Material Success Through Yoga Principles. I mean, how could you imagine a title of a book like that? Material Success Through Yoga Principles. And of course, it's not about the great goal of finding material success. It's about saying, if you're going to be working in the world, if you're going to have a business, why not bring God into it? You'll bring joy into it. You'll bring seva, selflessness into it. You'll bring success, and the ultimate success of being free inside. Yes, you'll also probably find more material success rather than less. But the goal of life is to bring God even into that. Swami Kriyananda brought something for Yogananda also, which is a new way of renunciation. He wrote a book called The Renunciate Order for the New Age, which is that renunciation is not about negating everything and leaving the world. Because, again, where would you go? But also the world needs people who have this positive form of renunciation that he gave, which is giving one's life to serving God, to serving others, renouncing the ego, and giving everything of yourself and giving to others. Again, wherever you are, there's no need to escape anywhere or go anywhere. You can find God, you can renounce, you can find the deepest spiritual experiences where you are right now, where God has put you. Art as a hidden message. Art as a form of renunciation, or not as a form of inspiration and attunement to God, and being a vehicle for expressing the divine through art, through music. These are all relatively new concepts, but Yoganandaji brought his blessing and vibration into each and every one of them. The Art of Supportive Leadership. This book that Swamiji wrote, again using Yoganandaji's principles, has been used by corporates all over America, by large corporates, and it's been used by corporates here in India. And how could a yogi, someone who lived in this ashram in the mountains, know about leadership in corporates? Well, it's because he understands human nature. And again, he understood Yoganandaji's teachings about bringing God into every aspect of life. Education for life, which is the principles of raising children in an inspired way, not just having them pass all these tests and stressing them out. And Swami Kriyanandaji was very saddened by modern education, especially what he was seeing in India with the extreme competitiveness and children committing suicide because they had failed at a test, and just he felt that everything had gone wrong, also in America in other ways. And he was bringing Yoganandaji's how to live principles into raising children and into the school system. Ananda Yoga, a new way of doing Hatha Yoga, using affirmations and inner principles. Marriage, bringing spiritual principles into marriage and bringing God into that and uplifting two people cooperating, working together, finding God together. Affirmations, using the power of the mind, because what Yoganandaji brought was body, mind, and soul all together. It's so interesting what Yoganandaji, how far ahead of the time he was. Speaking of the body, he had his disciples doing aerobic exercise. He had Swami Kriyanandaji running or walking briskly every day as a form of exercise when nobody, this was the 1940s, nobody was doing that sort of thing. Yoganandaji also understood the brain and understood that we can change the brain, the science of the brain, through practicing meditation. And he taught years before the doctors ever accepted it, that we can actually change the cells, the blood flow, the energies of the brain by meditation. And doctors didn't accept that until probably 1960s sometime. Diet. He taught a whole different approach to diet that the whole America is following now in many ways. Doctors are promoting these things. And it was the very principles that are based on fresh foods, fruits and vegetables, right living, right eating. And finally, spiritual principles of Kriya Yoga and meditation. This practice of Kriya Yoga, again, is something that anybody can do. It's very simple. It's very easy. We have to put out the effort to learn it and to make a commitment to it. But I can say, having been practicing these teachings for 40 years now, I've seen hundreds, many thousands of people do these things of every walk of life. People who are gardeners, carpenters, people who are businessmen, computer programmers, parents, artists, musicians, teachers, mothers, fathers. I've seen that this principle of Kriya Yoga, practiced every morning and evening, and then applied in daily life, has the power to change the world. It really does. Ananda Village is, in a way, it's a beautiful experiment of these principles. It's been there for 50 years now, and there are about 250 people living there. And they're all Kriya Yogis, except for the children who are still coming up, and they're given the choice. They're not forced into any of these things. And you see that when people change themselves, then everything changes around them. And this is the whole principle of the spiritual life. And Yoganandaji mentioned this in this talk we listened. He said, don't try to reform the world. He said, try to reform yourself. And it didn't mean to beat up on yourself and, kick yourself when you make a mistake and do this and that. He was saying, meditate, practice God communion, and you will start to change. And I can say that after 40 years of watching thousands of people doing this, I see so many people becoming saints by this very simple practice of Kriya Yoga meditation. Those of you who are new here, you can learn it here. It takes, some months to work towards receiving initiation into the technique. But I can say, in all honesty, that without exception, those I've seen who have practiced these practices of Kriya Yoga, followed Yogananda's teachings, 10, 20, 30 years, they become saints. I also quote in this article something that Master said about Kriya Yoga. He said, I can take a few young men of the most restless sort and let them practice Kriya Yoga for 2 hours every day in the way I tell them, and without question, in 4 or 5 years, I can make saints out of them. Isn't that an amazing promise? I can take a few young men of the most restless sort. How many of us, I think he was pointing more towards the men because they tend to be more restless. So I think he was saying it's harder with men. So for any women who might be feeling left out by that statement, I think he's saying probably it would be 3 or 4 years for women. But that is Yogananda's promise. Finally, spiritual communities. He brought this concept of what he called world brotherhood colonies. He said that this world brotherhood colonies would be the salvation of the planet, or world brotherhood, and the principles of world brotherhood, because we see in this world, it's a very uncertain world today. We see just about every nation approaching a war with their enemies, even people who maybe used to be friends, and you just don't know what's going to happen. It's not looking very good in the future. Yoganandaji was extremely strong about this world approaching really, really difficult times. He said, you have no idea what is coming, is the way he put it. And that's why he said to start communities. Here we have a community in a way, here in Boshalanagar, of people gathering here a few times a week for satsang, meditating together, several people living here. And so Yoganandaji wasn't just bringing a teaching for just a few. He was bringing something that would be applicable to every single person in this room, in every part of your life also, not just in part of your life, but in every part of your life. He really came to change the world. It's as simple as that, starting with each one of us. And that's sort of the beauty of a great, great master like that, is that he had this world-changing mission to perform, but he also had a very personal and individual mission to perform, changing each one of us. I've heard so many stories over the years of people who have had these really miraculous experiences and visions of Paramhansa Yogananda. And it just expresses this deep truth that, as he said, as he was approaching the end of his life, and he was asked, well, what's it going to be like when you're gone? And he said very simply, to those who think me near, I will be near. And he is not far at all. He is very near. We had a small sort of experiment done at Ananda village that was very interesting, where they were testing the size of people's auras or their spiritual magnetism and seeing how it changed by practicing different practices. And they were able to test, and the aura is just basically a sort of a visual in a way of your spiritual magnetism and your energy. And they found that after someone sat at a computer for a long time, they tested his aura. Guess what? It got smaller and smaller from doing that. They found that when people did Yogananda's energization exercises, the aura got bigger. They tried all these different things. But the one thing that had the biggest impact of all, more than anything else, was the simplest. They asked a friend of mine, who I've known for many years, who actually has a hard time meditating because he has bipolar disorder and just has had a lot of mental issues. But they asked him simply to think of Yogananda. And that one simplest thing of all had the biggest influence on people's auras, just doing that. And you didn't have to be a great meditator. You just had to be sincere. To those who think me near, I will be near. And that is the blessing of a great master, of a great avatar like Paramhansa Yogananda. He's infinitely vast in his consciousness, but also infinitely personal. And to each one of us who calls on him, who prays to him, he will send help. Even if it's just changing your aura, your magnetism, doing some unseen miracle behind the scenes, as I think many of us have experienced over the years. So try to see, even if you have a spiritual path, also see Yoganandaji in a way as the guru of the modern times. This is what Swami Kriyanandaji often said about him. And again, he is very accessible. Also, finally, just have satsang with people who follow him and spend time with him. And as Yoganandaji said in this talk, the charcoal doesn't become red by itself. It needs another hot charcoal to get it red. And that simply is the power of satsang. But it's also the power, again, of tuning into a great master like Yogananda, who, as this great saint Swami Ramdas said to that disciple, no, you're dead, Yogananda is alive. And so let's make him a living presence by meditating with him, on him, feeling his presence in our lives, and also just trying to find a way to bring his principles into your life. There are so many books that Swami Kriyanandaji has written about this. So whether you're a parent raising a child, a business person, computer programmer, there's some book that Swami Kriyanandaji has written just for you about bringing these principles and bringing Yoganandaji's presence and power into your life. So we will have an arati now, we'll have a meditation or a ceremony of light and blessing of light, and we'll have a chant, and we'll have prasad afterwards. So blessings on all of us on this very blessed, wonderful day.